Hi, my friends. Welcome to Word Made Digital. I'm your host, Joanna LaFleur. And on today's episode, we have my friend and a mentor of mine, Helen Burns from Relate Church in Vancouver area, Canada. She and her husband, John, have this amazing church story, and they travel the world now talking about things like dating and healthy marriage and relationships. So they have done local TV and radio, and now they host a show on the Hillsong channel called Sex, Love, and Relationships. Maybe you've seen it or you've seen clips of it promoted on social media if you haven't had a chance to check out the Hillsong channel. So we're going to be talking to her about what it's like communicating on stages and on media platforms as she has done for decades. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Hey, thanks so much for subscribing, for posting, for sharing, for rating this podcast. I love when people are telling me that they're sharing it or that they found out about it because someone else shared it with them. That's how we're going to spread the word about this podcast and ultimately how we can help more people be the best they can be at communicating this most important message in the world. So I want to thank my sponsor as well, Wycliffe College. They're helping us also do what we do here on Word Made Digital. If you don't know, Wycliffe College is an evangelical graduate school at the University of Toronto. They are a theological school, but at a secular university, and they offer certificate, master's, and doctoral programs and conjoint degrees, meaning you can get a degree from Wycliffe and the University of Toronto. And of course, University of Toronto, if you don't know, it's one of the top universities in the entire world. So you get an amazing education, an evangelical theological education, but you get it also through University of Toronto. So I chose Wycliffe for a long list of reasons, but actually the rigorous academic experience was a huge part of why I wanted to go there myself. And I liked that it was an evangelical approach, but from an Anglican or an Episcopal tradition. And that would, for me, as someone who didn't come from that tradition, really stretched me, grew me, and gave me some new perspectives. I think the point of going to school is to learn and consider things that are a little bit different than yourself, or not that everyone in the room has to already agree and come from the same background. And so I loved that about the academic experience at Wycliffe. It was just a school where the academic circle that it travels in was different than my own, but also really highly rigorous in terms of the intellectual education that you got. And so I loved that opportunity that I had at Wycliffe, and I think you should check it out too. If you go to wycliffecollege.ca/wordmadedigital, you can see more about my own experience at Wycliffe. They made a special page just for us, all about what the school is, and really as a creative and a communications person, why I chose it. And I think it's worth checking out yourself. So go on there and check it out. All right, here is now our conversation with my friend, Helen Burns.
Welcome to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur. You're listening to Season 2, sponsored by Wycliffe College. Word Made Digital brings you interviews with brilliant Christian creatives and communicators to inspire, challenge, and equip you in your own work. The church carries the best news in the world, so we want to help you be the best creatives and communicators in the world. Here we go.
Well, hi, Helen. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Super excited to be with you.
It's an early morning for you on the west coast of Canada. I'm on the east side of Canada, so thank you for an early morning. Although it sounds like you've been up.
I am an early riser. I don't do really great at the end of the day. My creativity is definitely in the morning. I didn't used to be like this, but now I would rather, if I had to write a sermon or something, I'd rather wake up at 3 a.m. or have to then write it at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
Just me, age.
Well, I hear that will happen. I have always been a night person myself. And those passages in scripture where it talks about Jesus rising early in the morning to go off and be with the Lord. I don't understand. that has never been me. But I think that probably with age that begins to change. I hope it does anyways. But
or children.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, and I know that in your household, you have a personal barista.
I do. He's pretty cute too. He's pretty awesome. I've been married to him for almost 45 years, but
Wow.
he's in Africa today. So
Oh,
I
is
had
he?
to make my own coffee, and it's kind of a
no.
drag because he's pretty good at it.
Yeah, well, I know you've got like an espresso machine there, and
Yeah.
I've been on the calls with you before where he comes and brings you your latte or whatever it is that he's making
Yes.
for you. So, okay, let's dive into just who are you before we go on too far. Obviously, I feel like you're a friend to me, and so we could talk without telling anyone who you are. Can you give us your context? Who are you?
Oh, wow. That's a big question, especially since I've been alive on this earth for a while. I'm Helen Burns. I live in Vancouver, born and raised in Vancouver, and still here. Very, very grateful. Met and married my high school sweetheart at Killarney High School. And after getting married at the ripe old age of 18, he took off and became a dentist. And after being a dentist for 10 years, really felt the call of God to pastor a church. So we laid that aside, and John and I planted a church in 1986, and at that time was called Victory Christian Center. Today it's known by Relate Church, and we just celebrated our 33rd anniversary as a church. Amazing days, and I'm a mother of 3 amazing daughters and 8 incredible grandchildren, so that's my life in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, family is a huge part of your life. I love, when John, he brings out this accordion for everybody's birthday. There's this amazing tradition you have. Where did that start, that this accordion thing happened?
Well, he actually, it's so funny because he started playing accordion because he so admired his older cousin who did. And he played in a band, if you can believe it. So John actually started playing accordion at about 12 years of age, and he mastered it. So he plays keyboards, but he's a pretty darn good accordion player. And believe it or not, he played in a band as he was going in his high school years and then also through university. And that playing on weekends put him through university so that he came out of university debt-free. And there we were up to pregnant with my 3rd kid, and that old accordion. That did the work. So we have them in almost every closet in our house. There's an accordion somewhere. So there's like this little collection. He's pretty synonymous with an accordion, and we party hard with it sometimes.
Party hard with that accordion. Well, I know every birthday I see on social media, he's singing to the kids or the grandkids, and it's this really sweet tradition that you have. Now, where are the kids? Do they roll their eyes about this, or do they? When your kids were young, was this not cool that their dad played the accordion?
I don't know that they rolled their eyes. It's not a cool instrument. And John is pretty convinced his one mission in life is that he's going to convince people one day that it's cool, but so far it's not working.
Oh, man.
So I don't know if they rolled. Yeah, they probably did roll their eyes. It's just who John is. And the thing about him, he could care less if it's cool or not. He likes it, so it doesn't matter if you do.
Well, that's it. And that's, I think, in so many ways, the spirit of who you are as a couple is like, you're comfortable in your own skin. And there's a joy to everything that you do. And who cares if what other, not who cares if what other people think in a obstinate kind of way, but you're just living life and playing the accordion. I love it so much. Your barista and your personal musician right there in the house.
Yes. Yeah, I don't mind if he's sitting at the grand piano and playing it. It's a little bit nicer to me than the accordion, but you know what?
Yeah. Well,
I'm not going to complain. It's loud, but it's who we are too. We're kind of a loud family.
I love it. Well, and it's better than the bagpipes. I did have a neighbor who played the bagpipes at one time in my life, and it was just so bad.
You know what? I need to be reminded of that. I will be grateful for the accordion.
Yeah, it's a step up, that's for sure. And probably, the bagpipes are a bit of a different cultural background than your own.
So, there's a lot of German in the background for both John and I, so there you go.
And tell us a bit, we'll go more into, what people are really here to talk about with us, to listen in on it. Tell us more about your church. And you've been in, obviously, a recent transition in your own leadership roles there. So tell us a little bit about what's going on at Relate.
Oh, I love our church. I got to preach there on the weekend, and I was talking to our daughter, who actually is taking the leadership forward for the next season, and is currently the lead pastor. It's all very official. In a couple of weeks, the full transition's happened. But I said to her, gosh, I love our church. I really do. We've never had a season where I just don't love church, because I think it's not so much the institution we love the family. We've always done church like a family. We feel like that's what it is. It's a big gathering of a whole lot of people, but I feel like this is our big, often messy and complicated, but stunning, gorgeous family. And so pastoring has been the greatest joy for John and I. And even in the season of transition, we don't have a sense of we're leaving, because we're not, that we get to continue to stay a part of this beautiful family, but in a different role. And so Relate is very much known. The name Relate came out of so much of what our passion is, that people would have thriving, healthy relationships with God and with people. And Jesus told us, by this will all men know that you're my disciples, by the way you love one another. And I think we've really taken that on as our mission in life, is that we love people within our church community, that we love people outside of our church community, that we love and serve the world that God has placed us in. So that's been that's been really the heartbeat of our church, and will continue to be going forward, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and you, of course, you travel all over the world speaking, preaching, teaching, workshops, communicating, but yet you can't help but everywhere you go, which I love, you're talking about your home church. You're talking about this place that really has captured your heart and your life's work, your ministry. And I'm sure the transformation that continues in all of us, our own discipleship, it happens in that context of that local church. And so I love everywhere you go, you're talking about church, and not everybody does that. And I think because not everybody has that love for their church like you do.
I do. John and I, our story is one of our earliest days. I grew up in church, as did John, very, very different denominational backgrounds, couldn't be more diverse. And so went through a bit of a hiccup through our early years of marriage, but came back really at a crisis time in our life. And John had just graduated as a dentist. We were living up in northern British Columbia. We spent 6 years there. And the thing that really rescued us is we got planted in this beautiful, local, life-giving church. It was much smaller than the churches we had come from, but it was family. And I think we felt rescued in the context of community and church. And I think that has been the foundation of what we built from. We got involved in a small group, we started serving in church, and we discovered who we were and what God had called us to do in context of church. So for me, I'm extraordinarily protective of the church. I feel like the big church, I know it's not perfect, it's flawed, and it has lots of challenges, but you'll always hear me defending it, but not with a blindness, knowing that I know it's not perfect, but I love the church, and so I will, till my dying day, promote God's beautiful family, imperfect as it is. Yeah.
I know it's this quote, I think it's Augustine, but there's this famous quote that, it's a bit brash, but I think that's why it startles us, and it says, the church is a whore, but she is my mother. It's that the church is a broken place, but she is my mother. She is my place of life, and I will protect her and love her and care for her. I admit what she is, that she is broken and struggling sometimes. Yeah. That she's not faithful to God all the time. But she is my mom.
Yeah,
I love that.
And I feel that deeply, and I am forever grateful for how I found home in that context, not religion, but relationship. And so I think that has been our mission from day one, is to create that. Yeah. And we haven't done it perfectly, but I look at our family and I think our church family, and I love it. I love it. And I'm excited to serve it.
Yeah. And for you, a lot of your work from the beginning has been connected to some really creative uses of media in church
Right.
to try and get this message. I was learning that through actually I was just sort of reading up things I didn't know about you before we dove into this conversation today. And there was this billboard campaign that you did in 1986. Can you tell us a little bit about that? When you first had the church, you went with this bold billboard campaign. Tell us about that.
Poor John's mother, I think she's still in shock about it because she's in heaven now. But I don't think, first of all, she was challenged that John, that he left dentistry. My poor mother-in-law, what we put her through. But we planted a church. And in the earliest days, John, as we were planting the church, John was also involved in doing a weekly TV show on one of our stations here, BCTV. And so it was also Expo 86 in Vancouver. And so right at the gates, there was this massive billboard that went up and it said on it, Jesus is Lord over Vancouver.
Wow.
And a photo of John was in the corner. Mostly it was a picture of Vancouver. And in the corner, it said, watch John Burns at BCTV. And so, we were out there. And so John was on television for numerous years before I ever got involved. I was always the very, very reluctant recruit. But he was shooting back in the day, or, he did stand up. It was just a talking head, as he called it, but has always had a passion for media. And a lot of that came out of just this desire John had felt, and it was really a prophetic word that was given over him that he probably didn't understand it all at the time, and he wasn't pursuing it. But one day you look at, you think that was the word that God fulfilled, was that an amazing prophetic voice spoke to John and said, and this is when John stuttered, so this is a bit of a shock when it first came to him. He's like, yeah, right. But they said, you're going to be a voice in your generation to this nation. And it freaked John right out, because speaking kind of spoke, that was before he was on television, and yet that was a word that he carried in his heart, a dream, but it seemed impossible, because when you stutter, you don't go on TV and you don't preach. But God healed him magnificently of that. And so I think with all that God was doing in his life, he just said, any medium that I could use to share the gospel, I'm going to use. And at that time, television was available. So he started shooting TV in 1986.
Wow. And recruiting people through bold, and maybe in some places in the U.S. or other places in the world, it would be less bold. But in Canada, certainly today, I can't imagine it would have been much different in the 80s. To say Jesus is Lord over Vancouver in a very multicultural, multi-religion context, and a place that wasn't super Christian.
No.
It's offensive.
It was very audacious.
It's audacious.
I don't even think we realized that it was offensive. It was just our conviction. So it's like, let's tell the world. I don't think we thought about whether it was politically correct.
Right.
We just felt like, let's declare it and invite people to watch the TV show. But that was our bold beginning. I am married to one of the boldest people on the planet. I think most of my life has been just holding onto his shirt sleeve and running. And I always say the most dangerous, I was always the good girl. John was always the bad boy. So I always think that the most rebellious thing I ever did was date John Burns and fall in love with him. And then it's been a crazy ride ever since. But I have grown in boldness and strength as well. But that's been our crazy adventure, and I don't regret a moment of it.
Oh man, it's amazing. And so eventually he, on his, as you say, on his coattails or whatever, you entered into media world yourself. Tell us about this radio TV thing that you did in the 90s.
Yeah, so back in the day, I know you're way too young to remember this perhaps, but it would have been in the early 90s. There was a TV show, a talk show that was on the radio. Her name is Dr. Laura Schlesinger. And even before, and then there was also a TV show that was on called the Sunday Night Sex Show. Anyhow, so with that, they kind of felt like, okay, so Christian values are different. That was, where Dr. Laura had really strong, but they recognized that Dr. Laura had a really strong voice on morality and just how to, to do relationships and such. So a local radio station reached out to us and said, would you consider doing a live talk show, 9 o'clock daily, Monday through Friday. And so we thought, well, let's give it a go. Why not? Because we were able to do it remotely as well. So it just felt like we could do this. And I loved it. While TV was a challenge to me, radio I loved. And what was so great about it was I recognized we were talking not to Christians per se. We were talking to just a general audience. This was a talk, one of the top rated stations in our city. It was secular. And so we were getting all kinds of questions. And so, of course, we had somebody that was working the switchboard, but it was taking questions from an audience that was out there in their car or in their homes. I loved it. Wow. And I think John and I realized that, while we didn't preach on that show, we gave biblical wisdom. We might have said Jesus said, or Solomon said, or we could have said, Martin Luther King said, but it was not pushing so much the Bible, even though the foundation of everything we said was the Bible. And I think it was a great big eye-opener for us that the world is hungry for wisdom, and the Bible has the answer to everything. Wow. And from that, first of all, what was powerful about that, I think it really helped shift how we even did church. Because we recognized that for so long, perhaps, we were preaching messages that nobody was asking those questions. We just preached a good biblical message. And I thought we wanted to be really relevant to a world that was very lost. And primarily, we talked about relationships. We weren't talking about, things like finance and that. We were talking about relationships. So people called in with relationship questions. And from that came an opportunity with a TV show that was opening up a station. It was if not one of the first Christian, it was called the Miracle Channel back in the day. And then it became Now TV. And we got asked to do a show called Pure Sex and Relationships. They wanted to call it Pure Sex, as in pure and holy. And I thought, there is no way I'm doing a show called Pure Sex. I thought, I am not a sex therapist, but they wanted it to be captivating. And so I said, if you put "and relationships" in it, I'll do it. So anyhow, but when it came out back in the day of TV guides, it says nothing but pure sex. And so I think people tuned in to see what in the world pure sex was all about. And it was on Sunday night across from this other sex show. I think when they tuned in, they were quite shocked to find Grandma and Grandpa talking about, that would be John and I talking about how God intended sex. And we talked very openly about it. And so that opened a lot of doors for us. And one thing led to another, and though we never pursued it, we were always invited to do something. So it's been an interesting journey, how God opens doors and invites you to do things that you think seriously. I kept thinking my kids are going to be harassed because of it. Or I remember saying, I'm not going to talk about sex on television or radio again if my grandchildren get harassed about it. And now I have a granddaughter who's 22, and she's so funny. She goes, no big deal. People need to hear what you say.
That's cool.
Yeah. So they never had a challenge with it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really neat. Yeah. She's kind of and maybe if it was her own parents, it would feel different. But with Grandma and Grandpa, she's, she understands the power of what you're doing. I mean, it's amazing. And I can imagine as you started out on radio with a live show, I can only imagine that you're having to answer who knows what on the spot. That's like on TV, I would imagine it would be more planned in advance. But on radio, you're just on the fly. You don't know what's coming. I mean, they're monitoring and they're filtering the questions to you through the switchboard, but you don't know what you're going to be talking about that day.
It was live. It was crazy sometimes. And I don't think I could have done it if it wasn't John and I together. But I think we played off, we're such different personalities and we play off each other really well. I'm kind of the dig, what are you really saying? And then Sean comes with the bam, this is what you need to do about it, But, and we did have some interesting, and thank goodness sometimes we just change the channel. We had to take the collar off, but it was very live. And to this day, I would say one of my favorite things to do is to take questions from a live audience and just bring it. And I'm very comfortable with it now, but that's what trained us.
Yeah. Well, trial by fire, I suppose, on the public radio. Yeah, their filter would be a bit different than a church filter. So if you can handle their questions, you can probably handle the questions that get thrown at you in a church audience.
Well, this is true. It was, yes, it was trial by fire, but it was a good experience. I love it.
Yeah. And over the years, I'd like to jump forward to the show that you do right now on Hillsong Channel. Since we're sort of on the train of talking about your content on media and TV, how did that come to be? You have a show, Sex, Love, and Relationships on Hillsong Channel. How did that come to be? Where did that phone call come from for you?
Well, John and I have had a long-standing friendship and relationship with Hillsong Church. The pastors and leaders are dear friends of ours. So for the last 20-something years, there has been, a real our hearts have been knit together relationally. And so then the time came when Hillsong Channel was being birthed, and it was, all of a sudden they need to get 24 hours of content. Mm-hmm. And 12 of them, I think, had to be Hillsong producing the content. And so I think one of the things that they had a great need for was lifestyle content. They had tons of preaching, tons of worship, but the one thing that was a bit of a gap was lifestyle. And John had said to the leaders running the station, if there's anything we could do to help, we weren't like, put us on. It was just, if there's anything we can do to help, we just would love to help. Do whatever you need to do. And so the call did come and said, we would like to do a show that looks like this. That is, again, questions, but, couched in a beautiful setting. And oh my goodness, their production is phenomenal. And so, what a privilege to be able to do that. So we just finished, we've done 4 seasons with them, and now we did a couple of shows that'll be coming on that were just 1 hour specials. We did 3 of those, so we'll just see how that goes too. So bottom line is John and I are just here to help, and if there's anything we can do to help serve what their need is, we're good to go. And we recognize that there's probably a lot of other people they'll encounter along the way that would be way better at this than us, and we're not precious about holding on to our place, but happy to serve. That's really why we're there. And that's how it opened.
And so what is the show? What is the format? For those who haven't had a chance to see it, what do you do on the show?
What we do primarily is answer questions. The show is beautifully produced, and a lot of the work, we don't do the work, we kind of show up, but there's just a tremendous team that produces a show. And in there, there's John and I and another host that would be on there and having conversations. Some of it's interviews. A lot of what happens is they go to the street and talk to people on the street, find out what's going out there. And again, it's a very secular audience, if you will. So we're not getting clinical questions, Christianized questions, if you can say that. But it's good. I love it. They do a great job.
And tell us, give us a little bit of that behind the scenes on the production of it, because of course a lot of people listening to the podcast are people who create content for other people. Mm-hmm. And so they'd be curious to know, how do you film? Where do you film? Are you doing it from Vancouver? Are you flying somewhere else to do it? How does that all go?
We've filmed in 2 locations. One of them is in Sydney, of course, Sydney, Australia, where Hillsong, and we have shot production for several of the series in the lobby of the big conference where there's 30,000 people coming and going, which has just got a great vibe and a buzz around it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, they're all kind of walking behind you as you're doing your interviews.
Down the escalator. Yeah, so we do that. And then we've also shot in studio. There's a studio in Sydney, and there's also a great studio in Los Angeles. So all 3 of those are locations where we shot at. The behind the scenes, while John and I help just maybe speak into some of the things we think questions people are asking, topics that are really relevant, there's a great team behind the scenes. And of course, Hillsong is known for creativity and just out of the box thinking, which is really fun to work with them. And so they have people behind the scenes that are very creative in producing what would be a great show. So there's a number of elements in our show that we're a part of that from, hosts that are maybe even in another city. There's just a lot of moving parts, if you will. And our contribution is having the conversation around a specific topic, which could be anything from sex, love, or relationships. And yeah.
Yeah. And so in a different way, it's not on the fly. You've prepared, you kind of know what you're going into the shoot to talk about. It's less of that live radio environment. And
John and I, it's interestingly, they have it all prepared, but John and I never know the questions ahead of time. We know the topic, but we don't ever know a question. Nope.
Okay. And you're shooting, I think, multiple episodes at a time. Like you're not flying back and forth to LA every week to shoot a show. You do, how many in a row would you do? How many days does it take you to film a season?
A season, when we did the season, it just depends the context, because whether we're doing it during conference, obviously it's going to take Monday to Friday or Tuesday to Friday, simply because there's a conference running alongside. Mm-hmm. When we did it in where it was just shooting all day, and we did, I think, 13 episodes, that was more like a 3-day shoot, but it was long days it was just, and it wasn't so long for us. It was really long for the crew, and about 40 but clothing changes. I never understood why you needed a wardrobe person, and I figured it out, because you're doing 7 segments per show, but you don't shoot them all in sequence. You do, so it's constantly wear this earring, do your hair like this. So that was an interesting thing. I've never had that before, but there's a real variation on how long it takes. Well,
and it's true, remembering, I know in my own experience, remembering what did you wear on the last shoot that we did, on the last clip that we did for this episode. We got to have continuity, wear the same thing again, the same hair, the same jewelry, especially for women, right? It's a more complicated thing. I remember talking to you at some point, but you were preparing to go to one of these shoots. It might have been a couple of years ago at this point. I don't remember, but you were talking about, what are you going to wear? What clothes are you going to bring? And I think men, it's a bit more straightforward. What you probably are going to wear, sort of a very simple wardrobe. But for women, it can be a stress what to wear on camera or on a platform. Not out of vanity, even, just you don't want to look sloppy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've learned what basics to wear, and then you can just keep changing shoes and a jacket. Honestly,
yeah, that's true.
You have Anyhow, I've learned that, and I'm not sure that it looks the best, but it works for me. Rather than having to go and change everything every time. Yeah.
And I found, whether that's, in my own work in front of the camera or work on, platform, being in front of people, the types of clothes you wear are different than the types of clothes you would wear hanging out with your friends to go to a restaurant or something. They might be the same, but the kinds of things you need for being in front of people are different. And it's a learning curve for a lot of people of what looks good, what looks sloppy, what doesn't go well under lights, or if you start to get sweaty.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. All of those things. It's amazing.
Yeah.
How they play into something may look good, but if it makes you really warm on stage, because stage, you're warmer anyhow. For me, anyhow, just the stress of it, not because it's horrible, but there is an element of stress when you're
going. Yeah.
Always. And I've realized, wear something that moves easily and keeps you cooler rather than heats you up.
Yeah, that's it. And I find that now with the power of Instagram, I'll sometimes go, if I'm thinking it's time to get a few new things to add to that part of my wardrobe, I'm going and seeing on Instagram, what are other women are kind of my age and style, what are they wearing right now? I'll sort of save a few of those pictures, so if I have to go shopping for some new stuff, I can sort of be inspired by, because sometimes again, the clothes you would wear to just hang out socially and go to a restaurant or be with friends in a different setting, it's a different kind of clothing than you need for stage, and sometimes you need some inspiration, so I go to Instagram for it.
That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. I should do that.
You know what? And I do it for other people on my staff sometimes. Sometimes I'm seeing, Gary Clark, who's the lead pastor of Hillsong in London. He looks a lot like the lead pastor who's running our staff team at my church. And so I use him as a style inspiration for the guy who's my boss. And I'll send my boss these pictures of like, hey, Gary got this nice leather jacket. That thing could look good on you too on stage.
There you go. Yeah, Gary's pretty classic. I feel like I could go and just pull stuff off the rack and know what Gary would wear because he's got a look.
Yeah,
as
it's
John.
true.
People always comment to John about his look, and I'm like, thank you. Like, who dresses you? I'm like, his wife does. But he's funny. He's fun. He's a great clothes hanger. He looks good in most things. But he would rather just wear black.
Yeah, well, and a lot of people do when they're, under the lights on a stage or on TV or whatever it is. Black is an easy go-to color because you get all that adrenaline and you get too warm, and it's just easier to wear black and not have to think about sweating or spilling your coffee or whatever it is.
This is true.
All right. So in this age, this digital age that we are in now, you and I are talking through video. Even right now, we're joking before we were having some tech issues trying to get ourselves set up here for the call. The digital age that we live in, it's everyday parts of our life. But what is exciting to you about this for the church? When you think about the future of the church, and you think about your own 30 plus years in ministry serving church, what's exciting to you about the possibilities?
Oh my gosh, they're endless, even though the reason there was tech issues is because I'm in the equation and I'm 63 and terrible with tech stuff. But what I'm excited about is connectivity, is having, that there's such an upside to it and such a downside as well. But I love the upside of it. I love seeing what God is doing in the world. I love the fact that because we can get a message out there. Back in the day, John was on TV in 1986, but it was one channel and it was local. Today, there is so much opportunity to connect on such a larger scale. And I feel like we're growing, and rather than see what has often divided the church or kept us separate, I'm seeing so much of a coming together. And yes, this world is loud and crazy, and there's a lot of things that isn't perfect about it, but I do see so much good. And I think we have the opportunity to get into the conversation. I love what you're doing, Joanna, that you have opened up your life. You have so much on the inside of you. And I love that you can grow this platform and talk to more people through this podcast and through your life, because it's something God's put on your life. And I think where that wasn't available that long ago, today, it's so readily available. And I love that. I think,
and even the cost of it too, it's, if you're, for me to do things like this podcast costs very, very little compared to what it would have cost in the 80s or 90s to do some sort of media program. People can do it out of their own home for almost nothing. Unbelievable
difference. Yeah. Like, I think about, John's often amazed with what we paid for those cameras early in our ministry. They were like the cost as much as a house did back in that day. Wow. Not a house in Vancouver today, but back in the day. They were so expensive. And today, what the quality that you get, even off your iPhone, is so much better than what we had back in the day with monster television cameras, and then paying a fortune for airtime. It's, the cost, the accessibility, the creativity. We learn so much from each other, and I think that's brilliant.
And so, you're in a time in your life where you could be winding down. You could be saying, I'm retiring, I'm just wanting to be a grandparent, but you're still traveling all over the world, speaking in churches and leading workshops and marriage seminars and all this kind of stuff. You're still you just said you're preaching still in the local church. Why are you still leaning in? What is the thing that is continuing to motivate you?
Well, I think in simple terms, the need is the call. The need is greater than ever. I think that our best years are in front of us. I can't imagine winding down. We love what we do. We love the opportunities, and interesting that I think we have our audience, even though our age has gotten, we're 65 and 63, it's amazing that I feel like our audience keeps getting younger and younger, that there is such a hunger. We're doing a study right now on Proverbs in church. And I just think that, our children, for example, John used this teaching the other day, our children can go, "Hey Siri," or ask any question in the world and have the answer, the square root of anything. How many languages are there in the known world? Blah, blah, blah. There's no end of information, but there's such a desperate cry for not so much information, but will you walk with us? Will you share with us? We want to know how to do this. We want good marriages. We see a world of broken marriages and broken relationships. So I see these 18 to say 30-year-olds, and they're desperate to talk to someone our age and say, will you help us? Will you talk to us? Not so much just tell us what to do, tell us why we need to do this. And so I've never seen a greater need and a greater hunger. So why would I go and get a RV and drive across Canada?
Yeah, how boring when there's a mission and a urgency to it. I love that about you. And as you're looking at younger communicators, a lot of people like myself listening to this podcast are people who have the privilege and also the responsibility of communicating, but they're a lot younger in the journey. They have less experience. So what's something that you would give as an encouragement, and what's something you would give as a caution that as you observe younger communicators?
I think probably the thing that would mean the most, I think, to everyone learning what their platform is to be honest and be true to yourself, not to try to be what you think is cool, what somebody else is doing. I think back in my early days of ministry, there was a certain female Bible teacher that I aspired to. I listened to her, and soon I found myself talking with a bit of an accent. I'm like, okay, Helen, I felt like God was laughing at me. It's like, Helen, you're not from Texas, you're from Canada. And so I learned early that the anointing is on the real you, not on the what you want people to perceive about you. And in this world of endless filters and, I think we need to tell our story not in the way that maybe a director or producer would, but to tell the story with a truth teller, a curator, a keeper, and a teller of truth. And I think that the earlier we can learn that people want the real authentic you and the real authentic relationship you have with Jesus, not what you want people to see, but who you really are, the faster we'll keep growing, because it's a bit of a revelation of how much I still need to grow, that I haven't arrived. I just always think the closer you can walk with authentic truth and show that in integrity and with responsibility, the faster we will see ourselves become all that God's called us to be. And not that we're in a race, but I just think so often we inhibit the true work of God in our lives because we're not really being who He's called us to be.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you've just said so much right there that people need to go and rewind and listen to again. So important. I love what you're saying, that being who you are as your authentic self, and let God bless your work and open doors for you in that way, rather than trying to be. It's true, especially in Canada. I find that I see a lot of people literally putting on accents. We were just joking about that in my staff team in my church yesterday, that people, they go on stage and they talk like Americans, but we're Canadians and we have our own funny little accent, and let's just use it.
Yeah, I agree. And people love Canadians, but I think I just didn't know who I was, and I was insecure. And so I looked at other people that I thought that's what I aspired to. And they're great role models. But I have to be Helen Burns, who the people don't want a version of somebody else. They want authenticity. And I think that's the one battle that we'll have to fight harder than ever in the days ahead, because there's so many people that we can compare ourselves to. And God's asking us, I mean, I just know the anointing of God is on that authentic you and your relationship with God. And that's what helps people grow.
Wow. Yeah. Well, Helen, could you, I don't always ask this, but at the end of an interview, but would you pray for people who are listening? Would you just leave them with a prayer of blessing for the work that they're doing?
I'd love to. So God, I thank you for this opportunity to just talk around what you're doing and what here in Canada, but around the world. And God, I just thank you for the people that you're calling to rise up and to stand strong and to take their place. God, that for such a time as this, we are all here with a mission that you've placed within our hands to carry out and within our hearts to nurture. And so, Father, I thank you for strengthening, for giving confidence where there feels a sense of insecurity, and God, just for brave people rising up and stepping into all that you've called them to be. God, I bless Joanna. Father, I thank you for how you're using her and her voice and her heart right now, right here, and I just speak blessing over it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah, well, amen. Helen, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I'll in the show notes below, I will give people a way to find you, find Relate Church, find you on Instagram or social media, find your show. And it's just been such a privilege to chat this morning.
Thank you for the privilege. I think you're amazing, and I'm glad our lives crossed and that we got to have this conversation today.
Thanks. Well, thanks so much to Pastor Helen for that great conversation. I always love when I get to learn from just her wisdom and experience over many years in ministry, many, many decades of experience. Hey, remember to rate, review, subscribe to this podcast, share it with other people. I don't want you to miss a future episode because next week we have John Tyson on the podcast. If you don't know John Tyson, go Google him right now. Go on Instagram. Go find and follow him. John Tyson is a widely respected church planner and leader in New York City. He's now leading a church called Church of the City in New York, and he's the author of a number of books. He's originally from Australia, but he moved to the United States about 2 decades ago because he had a passion, particularly to cultivate renewal in the Western church. So his preaching is known for this unusual fusion of passion and depth, and he regularly speaks at these large conferences and events around the world like Q Conference and Catalyst and many other places. Maybe you know him through John Mark Comer or people like that. He lives in Hell's Kitchen right in Manhattan with his wife and his 2 kids, and I just think we're going to have a great conversation about all things art and creativity and how it can bring revival in the church. So thanks again to my sponsor, Wycliffe College, making this podcast possible. And hey, they provide a really affordable education. If you're a Canadian, it's $602 for domestic students for a course. It's so affordable compared to a lot of other schools, and it's flexible in class or online, part-time, full-time, whatever works for you. Check out wycliffecollege.ca/wordmadedigital. It's linked in the show notes below, and you're gonna love the conversation we had on there about all things academic and theology if that's something that you're looking for. All right, see you next episode with John Tyson.
Thanks for listening to the Word Made Digital podcast with Joanna LaFleur. If you like this content, hit subscribe and share this episode with your friends. Head over to joannalafleur.com for more free tools, interviews, and media for creatives and communicators. We'd love to help you be the best you can be at communicating the best news in the world.